Are we still getting sound? Okay. Cool. We're live? Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everybody at home, and welcome to our guests here today. My name is Alan Saylor. I'm one of the naturalists here at Great Plains Nature Center. So what that means is it's my job to talk to people in the community about nature. And one of the things that I'm really excited to talk about today is moths, okay? The reason I'm talking about it is because next week is actually National Moth Week. And this is what's that? It's National Moth Week. I'll tell you what that means. What it means is it's a good opportunity for us to kind of explore nature at nighttime, okay? Because we don't usually, we're in bed while most of the animals in the world are awake and doing stuff. So looking for moths is a really good opportunity to connect with some of that nighttime nature. All right, so I'll tell you why I think you guys should try looking for moths next week and this summer. So first of all, if you're not looking for moths, there's a lot you're missing, right? There are a lot of really, really strange and beautiful moths that we have right here in Kansas. This one is called a Polyphemus moth. All right, and you notice it's really, really colorful, right? Something I used to think when I was growing up, right, is that all moths were just kind of, the same gray little, dusty things, right? They weren't really that exciting to me. It wasn't until I started looking more into moths and their, what they do, their life cycles, all that. It's really, 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 really cool. And so we're going to take a look.
What do you mean, moth?
What do I mean by a moth? Ooh, that's a good question. So moths are really closely related to butterflies. You guys know what butterflies are, right? Yeah, so moths are kind of like their cousins, right? They're similar, but they're different in some ways, right? Their antennas look different, their wings look different. They are usually out at night, whereas butterflies are out during the day, okay? So they're similar, but they're different. We're gonna watch a little video real quick here that's gonna tell you a little bit about moths and why they're worth celebrating. This is from the Hallberg Butterfly Garden. See if this will play here. Hang on. Whoops. There we go.
Ever celebrate moths? Well, like any good story, let us first start at the beginning. When the Triassic period is mentioned, we automatically begin to think of moths, the initial member in the order Lepidoptera. The word Lepidoptera means scale wing and includes all moths and butterflies. You can see the scales in this microphotograph of a moth wing. Moths represent 90% of all Lepidoptera, with the remaining 10% butterflies. There are some 160,000 species of moths in the world compared to roughly 17,000 species of butterflies. The oldest moth fossil recently found in 2018 shows signs of moths' existence 212 million years ago, with butterflies evolving from moths and appearing in fossil records.
No. Sorry.
As with most insects today, moths are holometabolists, which means they go through complete metamorphosis. This is a highly successful survival technique in distributing resources and surviving changes in the environment. As a genius of ingenuity and survival over the past 200 million years, moths have earned the love and respect of human beings worldwide. Excuse me, I meant to say, moths are drab, brown annoyances that flutter around porch lights at night. They eat all my food, my plants, and my clothes.
That's not true.
While there are some mischievous opportunists, it is important to mention that less than 1% of all insects are pests. That's right, less than 1%. And that includes both serious and cosmetic pests. So one could say 99% of your opinions on insects could include how truly essential and amazing they are.
All right, so some really interesting kind of facts in that video, right? Moths are older, okay, or go back to the time of dinosaurs, right? That's when they first popped up. They're even older than butterflies. And did you guys see? Did you guys see in that video the caterpillars? Right? Did you guys know that caterpillars turn into moths and butterflies? Yeah, so they do a thing called metamorphosis. A caterpillar wraps itself up into a cocoon and completely changes into a moth, right? And that's where we get all these really, really interesting looking adult moths from. This one is called a rosy maple moth. It's one of the most dramatically colored animals probably in the entire animal kingdom. It looks like a cartoon character almost. Some people call it like a strawberry lemonade moth. All right. Thank you for coming. All right. A couple of our guests had somewhere else to be, it looks like. There's actually a lot of moths that you can find here in Kansas as well. We've got over 440 species that have been recorded within the state. So if you think about that, that's almost comparable to the level of diversity we have with our birds. For all those birders out there, you may want to give mothing a try as well, because there's a lot to see there. That picture right there is of an Io moth, which is one that we have here as well. The thing that we notice first about it is those gigantic eye spots on its two rear wings. When they're threatened, when they're afraid, they'll actually kind of pull their front wings up and let those rear wings show, because they kind of look like eyeballs. And those eye spots have actually been shown to startle birds and things that might eat them off. So it's kind of a cool defense mechanism there. You also get a huge color spectrum with moths, right? So up there you've got, reds, oranges, yellows, greens, pinks, purples. You see a lot of different colors in moths. They're not all just grays and browns, right? A lot of different colors. And that's something I think a lot of people don't really think of. They think of, just being sort of drab and uninteresting. But you can really find moths that have as intricate and beautiful a pattern as butterflies do. All right. You also get some really weird looking ones too, right? This thing here doesn't look like a moth, does it? It's actually, and it is though, it's a kind of moth called a plume moth. And if you look, you can see its two wings, because all moths have four, right? They've got a pair of upper wings and a pair of lower wings. Their rear wings actually kind of look like little feathers almost. That's why they're called plume moths. And they've got a really weird shape to them too. They've got really long legs. If you saw that, you might mistake it for another bug completely. They're kind of scary. Yeah, they look a little strange, but they're really harmless, right? Moths aren't going to hurt you. There's no need to be afraid of them. They also do some weird stuff. This is called a slug moth, and they always land with their tails way up in the air, right? The reason they do that's kind of a mystery. A lot of people think that that's trying to make them look more like a twig or something that's not a moth. So they're kind of trying to fool things that might eat them. All right, you also get a lot of fancy flying with moths. So these hawk moths, these are a couple of sphinx moths here. You've got a small-eyed sphinx and you've got a white-lined sphinx, both species you can find in Kansas. They are really, really good at flying quickly and hovering. They can also navigate really, really well in the dark and hone in on the flowers that they look for food. You will see later in this presentation a photo of one of these sphinx moths actually feeding at a flower, and you can see how long its proboscis, its nose is. It's actually longer than their body. It's really weird when they're feeding. And of course you also get some really cool mimics with moths. This is one that I wanted to mention especially, not only because it has a great name, it's called a beautiful wood nymph. So that's a great name for an animal, but also it has one of the more interesting things that it mimics that I've seen in the insect world. It actually, when it's landed, you can see what it looks like. it famously mimics bird droppings. So when they're landed on a leaf, you can kind of see that they look like a little bit of a smeared, smudgy, something left behind by a bird, which I think is a really interesting way to blend into your environment. All right, so there's that photo I was talking about of a sphinx moth feeding in mid-flight. A really, really long mouth for drinking the nectar from these plants. Something that's also important to remember is that moths are kind of like secret pollinators, right? The reason I say they're secret is because we don't necessarily give them a lot of credit as a pollinator sometimes, because when we're awake and we're working in our gardens, we see bees and butterflies and other insects doing that job. Moths kind of take on the night shift, right? So once the sun sets, the moths come out. A lot of them are still looking for food. A lot of them are still pollinating the plants in your garden. So they do a lot of heavy lifting with that as well, just like bats do at night as well in some parts of the world. So if you think about it, there's also some plants that bloom specifically at night. Okay, so obviously those need a nocturnal pollinator in order to survive. What we've got here is you've got a 4 o'clock, which is named because that's when the blooms open in the late afternoon and the evening and remain open through the night. And then up here you've got an evening primrose, Missouri evening primrose. Both of those plants, their blooms open, they remain open throughout the nighttime. So if they're going to find a pollinator to help them survive, has to be something that's flying in the night. So those are good examples of moth attracting plants. A lot of other really just like nectar-rich plants are good for attracting moths. Again, to kind of get that second shift working with you on your garden, on the plants in your yard. They really help with that. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, another reason to look for moths is that they are very easy to attract. Okay, you're probably attracting moths to your home already, whether or not you are even trying, just by having a porch light on. It's really that simple. If you want to get involved with looking for moths and trying to find some, it's really just as easy as throwing on a light at night. They will come out and they will find you. You can obviously go a little bit further with that if you're interested in looking or attracting a larger number of moths and other insects, because there's a lot out there after it gets dark. Let's see. So this is one example of a setup that you could use in your home to try and attract moths. It's as simple as putting up like a UV lamp there. You can see they've got a couple ballasts set up with some UV lights, black lights. Also, some people also use black lights as well for this, and just a sheet that's kind of hung up as a backdrop. If you want to photograph the moths, if you want to look at them in a little bit more detail, have a less busy background, just hanging a sheet or a shower curtain, something for the moths to land on. You see, that's obviously in that picture, it's really effective. They're already starting to swarm around that lamp. So there's a lot you can do with just a few lights as your setup. You can also try using baits. This is something that's, yeah, there's a couple different ways you can try and bait moths. People who look for moths or breed moths professionally will use things like pheromones to try and attract moths, right? Because they really do have a very good sense of smell. That's what they're using those really beautiful comb-like antennae to pick up on is scents. So for example, like a female polyphemus moth, when she starts releasing pheromones to attract a mate, those moths will come from really great distances to hone in on that scent and find the female. There are other things you can do to create some powerful scents and things that are likely to attract moths. One of those is moth broth. So what that is basically just a concoction of some overripe fruit, some sugar, and some beer. It can be really whatever kind of beer. It doesn't have to be anything particular. But that mixture of the alcohol and the acetic acid from the fruit, that all creates a really a strong, a pungent, sweet scent that is really good for moths. They'll hone in on that. If you make a moth broth, you can kind of let it sit outside, let it kind of marinate a little bit when it's warm during the day, and then when nighttime comes, you can take that moth broth, paint it on trees, paint it on clotheslines or whatever you're interested in attracting moths to, and just sort of come back and check it every 30 minutes or so. The moths will find it. You'll probably, in the spots you marked, you'll see a lot of things starting to land there. Another cool variation of this that I learned about this year is something called wine ropes. That is exactly what it sounds like. So you're basically taking some wine, you're warming it up on the stove, not boiling it. You don't want the alcohols to break down and cook off or evaporate. You want them to just get warm so you can actually dissolve some more sugar in it. Then you just take lengths of rope and you soak it in that wine and sugar mixture. So that creates something that's also really strong smelling, really sweet tasting. You can hang those wine ropes up wherever in front of your lamps, and hopefully a lot of moths will come and check it out. Let's see. So, and then here, it's kind of surprising to see. There's a lot of like professional moth breeders and things like that on social media. So a lot of people who do take mothing really seriously and will try and capture adults and get after they lay their eggs, we'll take care of the fertilized eggs, raise the caterpillars up, and then sort of begin the cycle again. So it's a really interesting hobby, and this is one particular moth breeder that's on TikTok who calls mothings or sky fishing, which I think is a cool term for it, because it is. It's kind of like you're putting your baits out and you're just trying to see what you catch, right? You're trying to see what comes in. So this is a video of their experiences with sky fishing recently.
We raise giant silkworm moths and we go sky fishing with giant lights to try and bring in a mate for the moths that we already have. But we bring in other stuff all the time. Like tonight where we brought in a bunch of giant water bugs. These guys look cool, but they offer an excruciating bite with those two front pinchers where they inject you with acid and then slurp you out like a slushie. We did manage to draw in one very big polyphemus moth, but we needed a cecropia, so we ended up just letting this guy go, and this hawk moth, which was very hard to film. Gotta check the cage the next morning to make sure everything flew away. This girl didn't, so I gave her a plate of water to chill in until night comes again.
So that's the other kind of fun thing. If you're trying to attract moths, you're very likely going to attract some other insects as well that are active at night. Depending on where you live, giant water bugs or toe biters, as some people call them, might be an interesting one to find. They are pretty scary looking, but I've never really had an issue with them. You don't need to be as afraid of them as they look. And then this is the second part of that.
Sky fishing, part 2. We started off the night with this beautiful small-eyed sphinx moth. And then we drew in this gorgeous male Luna, but we needed a female, so we just let this guy go. They don't have mouths and can't eat, so they only live about a week, and their only purpose in life is to breed. And here Larry stole my mother's seat. Then we drew in another Luna, and I caught it in my sleeve somehow. I honestly don't even know how that happened. Turned out to be another male, but he was still very pretty and very cute. And then we released the water bug from the night before. And made a toad very happy.
So a lot of things are going to congregate if you decide to try out mothing, right? You're going to attract a lot of interesting things to your yard, to your porch. Yeah, so in some of those moths, you might not always get like some of the prized species, right? Things like Luna moths or some of those those giant silk moths in that family, because those are kind of those are kind of rare and a little bit harder to find, and has to be the right time of year and things like that. But there's a whole huge range of things that you are going to catch. So another reason that I would invite you to try and do a little bit of mothing is because you can actually help contribute to science directly, and that's really what the National Moth Week is all about. It's a community science movement, right? So that guy right there, he is John Pickering. He is a longtime moth enthusiast and biologist, and he's very hardcore about it. He is up at weird hours of the night. He's got his lights on, and he is photographing thousands of moths all the time. So he's put together a really extensive record of moth activity that scientists can use to determine, abundance, migration patterns, just the presence of certain species or the absence of species, things like that. So there's some really good data that scientists can use from this. National Moth Week is actually going to start this Saturday. So it's July 18th is when it begins. So this weekend could be a good opportunity to go out and attempt some of this stuff. Throw out some flashlights, throw out some some moth broth or whatever, and just see what happens. And if you do attract some moths, the good news is you can actually contribute some of the data that you're finding at your home. Because like I said, this is a citizen science thing. So you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be an entomologist to be able to help out. You can still contribute. So there's a lot of different ways that the National Moth Week data can be delivered, can be given to put out there for use by scientists. One of the big ones is iNaturalist, which I'll get into in just a minute because it's a really good app. If you're somebody who's wanting to know more about nature, or you're really interested in trying to identify species, but you don't always obviously have the opportunity to bring out a whole ton of field guides with you whenever you go on a hike, but you want to get better at it, you want to learn more, iNaturalist is a great way to do that. There's also Project Noah and the Encyclopedia of Life. Those are also really good kind of crowdsourced sources for wildlife data. So people go out, they observe wildlife, they photograph it, they submit it. It's tagged with their location, their time, and everything. So it's in real time. They're getting information about wildlife on our planet, and they're all really good initiatives, and all ways that you can submit photos that you take of moths. The best part is you don't have to identify the moths yourself, because obviously, we've got 440 species in Kansas. Worldwide, they've got over 100,000, over 150,000. So yeah, it's a big group of animals, and so telling them apart can be a challenge. But fortunately, you don't have to do that part. There will be entomologists. I think the word for someone who specifically studies moths would be a lepidopterologist, if you want to get really specific with that, because they're in the order Lepidoptera. So yeah, you don't have to know all that stuff. And let me pull up a little bit of iNaturalist here. This is just the observations, for example, from our own Chisholm Creek Park right outside here. You can see we've got a lot of active observers. We've got a lot of observations going in the books. And there are people out there observing plants and animals just as recently as last week. So there's a lot going on with this app, just right outside our own doors here in the Wichita area in general. It's very active. And you can kind of see, what it looks like if you were to, let's see, let's.
Alan, are you showing them iNaturalist?
Whoops, I'm sorry. I gotta get out of presentation mode here. Okay. Are we now?
You might need to change the way you do it.
There we go. Okay. So, like I said, okay, so when we're on iNaturalist, this is Chisholm Creek Park. The observations that we've got set up here. You can see it drops a pin everywhere that somebody makes an observation, so you don't have to worry about taking your GPS location, anything like that. It's going to take care of that for you. And then all you have to do is take the best picture you possibly can and post what you are seeing. So if we go to what one of the observations look like on there, let's look at this purple prairie clover. So you'll see it gives the date and time that it's been observed, and there's the person's picture, and you'll see that this particular observation was actually given was called research grade. So what that means, if we scroll down here, is that they've given all the necessary information for that data point to actually be useful to scientists. So they've got the date, the location, the photos. Somebody's ID'd it. Doesn't have to be you, because there is a lot of other people on iNaturalist that can help you out with that. I certainly don't know every animal in the world. I certainly don't know every moth in the world. So and then they're going to, if you've got accuracy of where you're at, and provided some evidence that it's there, obviously, with the photo. So, and that's all as simple as just clicking through a few buttons on the app. You can download the app on your phone. It's very user-friendly. It's very easy to get into. So if you're someone who's really excited about doing some citizen science type stuff, I would recommend jumping onto iNaturalist and seeing what you can find out there. Yeah, so that's what we're looking at for our National Moth Week. I invite you guys to try mothing. Again, it's as easy as going on and turning on your porch light. So it's a very simple thing to get started with. They're probably the easiest wildlife to attract to where you're at. There's definitely surefire ways to attract, raccoons and opossums and stuff like that to your yard, but you probably don't want to mess with that. Moths are harmless and they're cool to look at. So I invite you guys to try it. And also, I would invite you guys to come visit us at our Moth Mania next Friday. So on Friday, July 24th, we are going to be setting up a lot of these light traps. We're going to have some tents with UV lights in them. We're going to have moth broth painted on trees. We'll have some wine ropes and stuff like that out, trying to see if we can get as many moths from Chisholm Creek Park as possible to come and hang out with us. And you guys are welcome to bring your flashlights and come check it out too. So that starts at 9:30 and runs till 11. So again, come explore nature at nighttime with us, and yeah, we'll see you guys there.